So I want to talk about doubt. And actually, I should be working on my next book, but I'm kind of hung up on doing the um, table of contents because I'm actually designing this book. It's the second book I've self-published. I like something about self-publishing in that I have total control over the process of typesetting and so on, but it's not fun to typeset a table of contents. You might not recognize that, but it is actually quite difficult, or at least it is for me. And so when I face difficult tasks, I often like to talk about other things to postpone them. So I'm going to talk about doubt. And I want to talk about 4 levels of doubt. Now, I'm not really committed to saying there are necessarily 4 levels of doubt. The main thing I want us to recognize is that there is some degree of questioning all of our beliefs, and that's a healthy thing. So first of all, the first level of doubt is what I'm going to call technical doubts. Technical doubts are not really doubts. It's in the sense that we commonly think about doubt, that it's not like you're actively questioning a particular belief you have. For practical purposes, you may find that really you have no doubts about these beliefs, but nonetheless, you recognize that you could be wrong about them. If you've taken any philosophy, then you've probably wrestled with the kinds of questions that were raised by the film Matrix, right? The possibility that you could just be in that reality, that which you call reality, could just be the product of a computer-generated artificial world, and maybe you're just lying in a bed somewhere hooked up to a massive supercomputer. And so the world that you think is real, in fact, is not real. Philosophers have sometimes talked about that in the terms of a brain in a vat. It is possible that you are actually just a brain in a vat of nutrient liquid hooked up to various electrodes that are feeding information into your brain and creating the reality that you think is real. Or you may have woken up from a dream that was very vivid, that you were certain. I mean, I suspect we've all been there, right? You woke up from a dream, you were certain it was real, in the sense you had no doubts, and yet it turned out the dream was not real. So there's this famous story from Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, that he had a dream that he was a butterfly, and he woke up and he said, "Am I a man who dreamt I was a butterfly, or am I a butterfly dreaming I'm a man?" Which actually calls to mind the end of Inception, the film Inception, where it's kind of left ambiguous, or it's unclear. Are you awake or are you asleep? We don't know. So those are not the kinds of doubts that for most people keep them up at night. Well, they're just kind of in the background, a technical recognition that I could be wrong. This is the kind of doubt that you should have about Christianity if you're a Christian. Now, some Christians will freak out, even just saying that it's wrong to recognize that it's conceivable that you could be wrong about something. You shouldn't freak out about that. That's not a sign of impiety. That's simply a recognition of our epistemic status, or our status relative to knowledge in the world. That, as Paul himself said, for example, in 1 Corinthians 13, we see darkly as through a glass. We do not yet see face to face. We do not have the God's eye point of view, as philosophers often put it. So to recognize that Christianity in principle could be wrong, Islam could be true, atheism, or a particular brand of atheism like naturalism, could be true, that's at the level at least of technical doubt, that you can recognize your own epistemic limitations and fallibility. Paul recognized this again in 1 Corinthians 15 when he talked about the resurrection of Jesus, and he says, well, it's certainly possible that we could be wrong about the resurrection of Jesus, and if we are wrong, then we are to be pitied most of all people. 1 Corinthians 15:14, Paul says, we've been lying. Right? We've been testifying falsely about what God has done if Jesus has not been raised from the dead. So for Paul, this is a simple fact to recognize that we could be wrong about something. And I think that's exactly right. Technical doubts, that to recognize that we can have technical doubts is simply confronting our own limitations of knowledge, that we can be wrong about something. The second that you refuse to recognize you could possibly be wrong about something, several things happen, and none of them are good. For one thing, you become less able to consider the places where you could be wrong. I mean, just think for a minute that you're driving along in your car and you think, my car can never break down. Well, if you continue to have that attitude, then when the warning light comes on that there's an engine problem, check engine light, or when you begin to hear some strange whistling coming from the hood of the car where the engine is, or something else, the brakes seem to fail, and you keep ignoring that because, oh, I could not be wrong, my car could not break down. Eventually, you could be left stranded on the road somewhere because you did not listen to the warning signs. And it's the same thing with technical doubt. If you refuse to allow any degree of technical doubt into your belief system, you're not strengthening your belief system, you're weakening it. You're walling it off from potentially incoming disconfirming data that could challenge you to revise and rethink your particular view of reality. So this is a problem. We have to recognize technical doubt. Now, one other thing I just want to highlight in terms of none of these good things flowing from the denial of any possible technical doubt or error is that it shuts off your ability to interact with others in a neighborly way, or it certainly hampers it. Because if you cannot consider that you could possibly be wrong about something, then you're going to be less inclined to listen to others, and they will in turn be less inclined to want to listen to you. I mean, who wants to have a debate with another person if that other person thinks I could not be wrong about anything at all? It's impossible. That sort of shuts down the lines of communication. I hope you can see that. And so I think that it's negative. It has a negative impact on our neighborliness, on our ability to interact with generosity with other people and to learn from other people. So there is a great value in recognizing technical doubt. I could be wrong about Christianity. I could be wrong about my particular brand of Protestant Christianity. Maybe the Catholics are right. Maybe the Orthodox are right. So, you could go on, go on from there. Let's turn to the second one. The second one is personal doubts. Now, this is the point where technical doubt moves from being simply a mere abstract possibility to a more of a lived reality for the individual. So I'll personalize this. So when I want to talk about technical doubts for myself, theism is a technical doubt for me. I can conceive that theism could be wrong, right? That I could be wrong about that. I don't have any actual lived doubts about it, but it certainly is possible that it could be wrong. The resurrection of Jesus, life after death, those are things that for me are in the realm of technical doubts. They're not actual lived doubts for me as an individual, but they're possible there. When I get to personal doubts, this is where you get to things that you're a little bit more circumspect because this is more of a lived reality of questioning for you. So you can actually see in a more immediate personal way the strength of the arguments, how they could really lead you to qualify your position a little bit more. So, for example, when it comes to the concept of posthumous judgment, so what happens after death? What kind of judgment do people receive if they are not reconciled to God and Jesus Christ? Standard Christian soteriology or doctrine of salvation. Well, my view is the annihilationist view, that people are resurrected to judgment and they cease to exist at the result of the judgment. Those who refuse just to be reconciled to God. But there is other views, eternal conscious torment and universalism. Universalism being the idea that eventually there will be a period of judgment after death, posthumous judgment, and then everybody will be reconciled to God in Jesus. So the punishment is restorative on that model. And it's at this point that I would say I am an annihilationist in my understanding, but I am also a hopeful universalist. So in other words, I recognize that annihilationism could be wrong, and it's not just a technical recognition; it's a little bit more of a personal. Yeah, it could be wrong here, and universalism could be right, and I certainly hope it is right. I think Christians ought to hope that everyone is reconciled to God in Jesus. If you don't, I think you need to re-examine why that is. And I also think that the eternal conscious torment. I mean, some models of it are probably I don't think are live options for me at all. But there are versions of like C.S. Lewis's version of eternal conscious torment where people have a self-imposed suffering forever. That is also, I think, a live possibility. So I don't accept it, but it's within the area of personal doubt. So that's how I move now from technical doubts to personal doubts. And so with personal doubts, you continue to reflect at a deeper level on what you believe and why. So one of the benefits of identifying those beliefs for which you have some degree of personal doubt is it really continues to move you on a journey of reflecting on these beliefs and hopefully moving deeper into what you believe and why, or in some cases, ultimately abandoning your belief because you pursued those personal doubts to the point that they offered a sufficiently overwhelming critique that you simply had to abandon the belief altogether. Now, the next level I want to talk about is personal existential doubts. So these are doubts that they are personal, and it's just a little bit more intense. Like, I'll put it this way. So for me, the personal doubts that annihilationism could be wrong, they are not deep, nagging things that keep me up at night. But a personal existential doubt would be the kind of thing that would keep a person up at night. They would really worry about that. A few years ago, I was contacted with a friend of mine who he was in parachurch ministry, had been in parachurch ministry for more than 10 years at the same ministry, and he had deep doubts about the resurrection of Jesus as a historical event. At this point, I would probably say that for him, they were existential doubts. Okay, so the thing is, he still faithfully carried out his ministerial role, um, and yet he had these doubts, he had these questions, but he really worried about them, and he was seeking from me kind of resources to think through his doubt and questioning. And I don't know if he ever resolved his questions to his satisfaction, but I do know this: he shared his personal existential doubts with someone else at his ministry, and they fired him. Like, this was a person that he thought was a personal confidant, and they terminated their relationship with him. Although he had never shared it with anybody else, and he faithfully carried out his ministerial role. See, for me, I think this one of the signs of a Christian uh, and true Christian discipleship is not that you have no personal existential doubts, but rather that you keep rowing the boat even when you have the doubts, that you work through them, just like in a marriage. The good marriage is not the marriage that never struggles with personal existential conflict. It's the marriage that works through personal existential conflict. So I found that treatment of that gentleman was just really unfortunate. And I'm guessing that the way he was treated did not help his personal existential doubts. As Christians, often we shoot our wounded, do we not? So that's personal existential doubts anyway. I think in the case of personal existential doubts, if we want to think about doubt in terms of pain, then you can think about a pain scale. And when you get to personal existential doubt, that's like a kind of a chronic pain, but not a debilitating one. So personal doubt is just kind of like, ouch, that kind of hurts a little bit here and there. I recognize it. It's a little sensitive. Personal existential doubt, however, just begins to become chronic, and it's always there. And there's still, I mean, benefit in personal existential doubt. Like, there could be benefit in chronic pain, that maybe it drives us back to continue to reflect on this belief and to seek help from other Christians and conversation with other people that we disagree with on issues to try to work out our doubts. But that's personal existential doubt. The final doubt I want to consider, I'm going to call debilitating personal existential doubt. I'm sorry about the terms. I was not trying to look for clever terms. I just wanted to have something that caught the increasing intensity of doubts in a very clear way. So call this DPED, DPE doubts. Yeah, that sounds awful. But anyway, a debilitating personal existential doubt would be one that is not just chronic, but it's malignant and debilitating. It's like the person who can't get out of bed because they're in so much physical pain So the person who their faith is at such a critical crisis level, uh, their faith in whatever it happens to be, they're doubting. So it could be Christianity or anything else, right? Maybe it's their belief in democracy or talk about democracy. I mean, there were many uh, Republicans who had doubts about the Republican Party after Donald Trump became president, and some of them reached a point of debilitating existential doubt, and they abandoned the Republican Party altogether. And so now they are independents. And you can think about that perhaps as an analogy here that when you get to this level of doubt, whatever the belief is that you're doubting, it is now so critical that you just trying to hold on to your belief and you barely can and maybe you can't. So debilitating existential doubt is when people really find themselves at that crisis point where they're not sure they can retain the belief anymore at all. And of course, many of them end up abandoning the belief at that point. So that's my 4 levels of doubt. Um, I don't see a lot of um, value in debilitating personal existential doubt itself unless the belief you have is false and you ought to abandon it, in which case this can be an uncomfortable process, but it's a necessary process in the pursuit of truth. But the other dimensions of doubt in particular I just want to highlight is I think all of them just show that Christians all our lives, we and not just Christians, anybody, we are on a process of reflecting on, thinking about our beliefs, and there ought to always be a role for doubt in that. Now, some Christians today, I guess maybe progressive Christians, they want to valorize doubt as always being a good thing. And I don't think that doubt is always a good thing. I mean, and it depends on the degree of doubt. Uh, Personal existential doubts about something that is true and important is not a good thing. If Jesus rose from the dead, then all things being equal, to have the kind of personal existential doubt that really leads you potentially into a crisis of debilitating personal existential doubt in which you end up abandoning a belief that's very true and important, that's not a good thing. But it may nonetheless be a reality for many people, just like chronic and malignant and debilitating pain may be a reality for people. And so when people go through doubt about very important issues that you believe to be true, we ought to show compassion, not stigmatize them, not fire them. We ought to journey with them. And I think we ought to all recognize as well the role for technical doubt in the backdrop of all of our beliefs. So it can be wrong about all of these things. And also the level of personal doubt, to begin to recognize that not everything for us is a hill to die on, that some things we're a little less certain about. And so we ought not to place that at the center of everything and thus require that we have sort of maximal certainty about everything. So that's my quick reflection on 4 levels of doubt. And now I'm going to resolve to get back to working on my table of contents for my forthcoming book.